Good evening, everybody. I think we can start now, a little bit late, but due to the traffic problems. Unfortunately, today I have a little bit more to say, so stay calm. I think today is an interesting day because we are celebrating the Collide at CERN residency for the second artist this year. And I think that's very nice to have already the second artist having have had his residency here. And you all know it's a Swiss choreographer, Gilles Jobin. Now, Collide at CERN Geneva, and that's the difference between Collide at CERN and Collide at CERN Geneva, is now the second strand of Collide at CERN, Artists Residency Program, in which artists win through competition and selection a residency of up to 3 months. And I don't know, you were here 3 months, I guess. Oh, you took the full time, yeah? So I expect something, okay? And during that time, they can collide with particle physics in all its dimensions, human, because particle physicists are also humans. Don't forget that. We are not strange, we are normal. In theory, and also in experiments. And Gilles was the first winner of Collide at CERN Geneva, and this is our special annual prize in partnership with the city, the Canton and Republic of Geneva, to mark Geneva as a city of the arts and science. And we would like to contribute to that through these prizes. Now, this year was special. When Gilles came, we knew something would happen. Because he's a choreographer, and that means movement. Across time, I guess only in one direction, okay? But across time, but across space. And I think it mixes a little bit of gravity in, yeah? Now, a little bit of gravity, that means you need energy and or mass, okay? So we did not know what would happen during Gilles' residency, and we did not know that we would announce the discovery of the Higgs-like particle. Coincidence? I don't think so, no. That would be interesting, because we would invite you next year again. Okay, but one thing is certain. I think there's no part of the laboratory which he did not explore during his residency. And he made interventions which attracted the attention of the international press, like the Huffington Post and the Guardian, as well as the scientists in the laboratory here at CERN. And I must say, there was one event which convinced me that Artists in Residency is a good program for CERN. Because, I mean, there's, of course, some hesitation in not in the artists, but in the scientists or in the people in the laboratory. And I remember that you had dancers in the library, hanging around the books, hanging around the cupboards, etc. And the readers in the library, they didn't object. They took it as a normal thing. I must say that I was really astonished that I did not get complaints. So at that moment I knew this is a good program for CERN. Okay? So because it was accepted. Okay. So, and again, I think it's very interesting that I can report that Gilles is again an artist in residence who has managed to get in one of the most important science journals today, Nature. It's hard, as I said at our first artist in residence final lecture, to get in Nature for science. Now both artists have got in there, so I think that's another achievement which is very, very good and very interesting. Okay, so none of this, of course, would happen without our partners, the private donors, the Collide at CERN friends. They are all passionate arts and science lovers who help us funding Collide at CERN, which is now really part of CERN and Science program, so CERN and or CERN Science and Society program. An initiative which shows how CERN science holds an important contribution in all aspects of our culture. And it's not only the science, it's also the arts which contributes to that. So, tonight you will hear and maybe see some of these interventions at CERN, hear from scientists who were there, as well as see members of Gilles' own company demonstrating some of the movements generated by interacting with CERN science and scientists. And maybe we get some glimpse of the Higgs boson here also. We have to see what you think of it. Okay. Anyhow, It's an exclusive preview of the beginning of the creative process, which has happened after engaging with the ideas of particle physics. And I have been told that some news of other unexpected and new creative collisions will come up today, which shows that this experiment is alive. Okay, now you will also hear from the canton and the ville about the new arts domain, but beforehand I hand over to Arjan, our cultural specialist. Please, Arjan.
So this is Collide at CERN Geneva, which is a very special prize, and we're very, very grateful to the canton and the city and of Geneva for supporting this. As Rolf just said, it's very much about celebrating Geneva as a place of arts and science and the whole history of it. And we've just had 3 months of Gilles Jobin intervening within the laboratory. And what you're going to see and hear shortly is the beginnings, because it's very important to stress that Collide at CERN, the program, is very much about a laboratory of the imagination. It's about seeding the imagination, bringing in artists who haven't necessarily encountered particle physics or the strange world of the science laboratory, and then literally colliding them together. And then little beginnings come out of it. But I say that actually what's really going to happen, the impact of the residency happens about a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. And it's really important to stress that actually this is just the beginnings. So you'll see some beginnings and insights into how it's affected some of Gilles' thinking in terms of choreography. So what we're going to do is have a presentation from Gilles and some live performances as well, little extracts, so you can see how movements are being shaped or influenced perhaps. But it's just the beginning, and those shapes and movements will change. So I urge you to keep track of Gilles over the next year or 2 years and just carry on seeing how it transforms. Anyway, I'm now very happy to hand over to André Valdis, who's from the city of Geneva. And what I would also just say before we do that, shortly we'll be announcing the new Collide at CERN Geneva Prize, but also very shortly on Thursday, the next Artist in Residence with the other strand, which is with our international partners, Ars Electronica, and we'll be announcing the new artist on Thursday who's coming in 2013. So it's a question of lots of things happening, and watch this space and see how it grows. So I'll hand over to André Valdis from the city of Geneva.
Bonsoir. I hope you will forgive me speaking in French. Je représente ce soir Sami Kanaan, le conseil administratif de la ville de Genève en charge de la culture et du sport, qui pour la deuxième fois ne peut pas assister à cette cérémonie. La fois précédente, il était convoqué par la commission des arts et de la culture pour défendre son budget. Ce soir, c'est la commission des finances. J'imagine qu'il en est de même aussi pour la recherche. Il faut défendre les budgets, il faut être là. Cela dit, il le regrette énormément parce que Sami Kanaan est physicien de formation. Je l'ai déjà dit l'autre fois, il a fait un diplôme à l'école polytechnique fédérale de Zurich, et il était particulièrement concerné par ce projet. Il l'est toujours d'ailleurs. Et puis, la ville de Genève, sous l'impulsion d'un magistrat qui est d'ailleurs parmi nous, d'un ancien magistrat qui est là ce soir, Alain Vessade, je le salue, physicien lui aussi, il y a visiblement des liens entre la physique et la culture, a lancé, il y a une quinzaine d'années, une manifestation à Genève qui avait pour but de rapprocher la population et la communauté scientifique, les chercheurs en particulier, qui allaient au devant des gens, leur présenter leurs expériences, leur présenter des phénomènes physiques de manière amusante, pédagogique, ludique. Et c'est donc la Nuit de la Science, cette manifestation qui a lieu tous les 2 ans, et qui est une véritable fête de la science qui a lieu au bord du lac. Alors merci à Alain Vessade, parce que il peut se montrer peut-être il est timide, mais c'est grâce à lui que cette manifestation existe toujours. D'ailleurs, les liens entre la culture et la science sont peut-être plus étroits qu'on ne l'imagine. En tout cas, assez récemment, il y a une nouvelle idée qui, je dirais ça au début des années 80, qui a émergé et qui nous vient d'un ancien ministre de la Culture en France, cette fois Jack Lang, qui a désacralisé la culture et qui a donné une définition beaucoup plus extensive, beaucoup plus large que simplement réduite aux beaux-arts ou aux arts de la scène, théâtre, musique ou danse, ainsi que le rock'n'roll, le théâtre de rue, la gastronomie font partie de la culture d'une région, de valeurs communes, de choses qu'on partage, l'habitude de vie, etc. Et la science, dans ce sens, fait complètement partie de la culture d'une civilisation, d'une société particulière. Alors évidemment, on peut se poser la question, mais pourquoi est-ce que le CERN invite des artistes en résidence pendant quelque temps pour rencontrer des scientifiques, pour s'immerger dans cet univers? Je pense que cette définition extensive de la culture participe de cette motivation. Et puis évidemment, il y a aussi le fait que les modes de pensée sont finalement peut-être assez proches. La pensée scientifique, la pensée de pointe, en tout cas la pensée artistique, sont complexes, parfois incompréhensibles pour les gens. Et les chercheurs, tout comme les artistes, eh bien, sont animés par la passion. Et ça, c'est une chose commune, je pense, qui a dû être expérimentée ici. En tout cas, Gilles Jobin, avec qui j'ai bu un café la semaine passée pour lui demander de donner quelques indications quand même sur son vécu dans cette expérience, me disait qu'il y aurait un avant et un après Collide at CERN, parce que vraiment c'est une expérience qui, en tant qu'artiste, je ne veux pas lui voler des propos peut-être qu'il va dire tout à l'heure ou bien trahir sa pensée, mais que vraiment c'est une expérience dans laquelle il s'est plongé complètement. Il a exploré des phénomènes, des phénomènes complexes, justement, de physique des particules qu'il ne comprenait pas forcément, mais les explorer de manière sensible, intellectuellement et corporellement. Et ça fait qu'au final, eh bien, il a pu découvrir l'importance de l'échelle quand on parle de distance, quand on parle de force d'attraction, quand on parle de vide, l'échelle du tout petit, du très grand. Et il a dit une chose très belle, je trouve, et c'est le meilleur compliment qu'on puisse faire, à mon avis, à cette formule, à cette invitation du CERN, qu'il n'était jamais allé aussi loin dans l'abstraction, qu'il a vraiment pu travailler dans une forme d'abstraction totale dans son travail, atteindre un niveau jusque-là jamais approché. Et je trouve ça absolument extraordinaire qu'un artiste puisse dire: j'ai pu faire ici, et là je ne fais pas de jeu de mots, une sorte d'expérience de recherche fondamentale, de recherche pure, pendant 3 mois, d'être immergé dans un monde où je peux vraiment aller approcher de choses complexes, de choses difficiles, de choses qui ne répondent pas forcément à ma manière de fonctionner en tant qu'être humain, qu'être physique, etc. Donc voilà, la ville de Genève est très contente. Là, je me permets de parler en son nom parce que le feu vert a été donné pour continuer cette expérience. Elle est très contente de se rapprocher de la communauté internationale, de rapprocher la science et l'art. Et donc, longue vie à Collide at CERN. Et on se réjouit de voir ce que Gilles va nous montrer tout à l'heure. Merci.
I'm sorry, I will also speak French, if it's fine for everybody. Monsieur le directeur général du CERN, monsieur le représentant du département de la culture et du sport de la ville de Genève, mesdames et messieurs les représentants de la communauté scientifique, mesdames et messieurs les scientifiques, les amis de la science et les amis des arts, messieurs et mesdames les chorégraphes, danseurs, cher Gilles, c'est au nom du conseiller d'État chargé de l'instruction publique, de la culture et du sport, monsieur Charles Bert, que je vous parle ce soir. Il a malheureusement été retenu par d'autres obligations et il n'a pas pu nous rejoindre. Je tenais à vous exprimer notre fierté d'avoir pu contribuer pour l'État à la collision créatrice entre Gilles Jobin, et en scientifique, je pense M. Jao Pequeñao, si je prononce bien, qui est toujours dans la salle. Et nous nous réjouissons beaucoup, nous sommes assez excités, je dois dire, à l'idée d'entendre Gilles tout à l'heure et qui va nous retracer les moments clés de cette résidence. Pour le canton, nous sommes particulièrement heureux de ce magnifique partenariat entre le CERN, le canton, la ville de Genève, qui va dans le sens des convictions du département en matière de culture, à savoir l'importance de relier des pôles différents, d'instaurer des passerelles entre des mondes qui ne se côtoient pas forcément, sciences et arts, mais aussi domaines artistiques distincts, nationalités et communautés les plus diverses. En d'autres termes, Collide at CERN Genève est aussi une initiative qui contribue à créer du lien social sur le territoire genevois, et nous nous en félicitons. C'est donc avec un grand plaisir que nous renouvellerons aussi l'expérience en 2013 pour le prix Collide CERN Geneva, et cette fois dans le domaine de l'audiovisuel. Notre canton a reconnu depuis de longues années le travail et la qualité artistique des créations de Gilles Jobin. Aujourd'hui, nous nous réjouissons du rayonnement international dont jouissent ces créations et de la renommée qu'il confère ainsi à la scène de la danse contemporaine comme à Genève dans son ensemble. Cette reconnaissance qui s'incarne dans la compagnie Gilles Jobin souligne aussi l'excellence de ce domaine artistique à Genève, puisque 5 autres compagnies de danse genevoises bénéficient aujourd'hui d'une convention de soutien conjoint qui lie le canton, la ville et la confédération. Si je mentionne ça aujourd'hui, c'est que pour l'État, en effet, il est important d'accompagner la création artistique sur la durée, d'abord en soutenant les jeunes talents, puis les talents confirmés, mais aussi en maintenant des relations de confiance avec ceux qui évoluent désormais sur la scène internationale. Le projet de loi cantonale sur la culture qu'examine actuellement le Grand Conseil souligne l'importance de ce suivi et la nécessité de la cohérence d'une politique culturelle concertée pour Genève. Cette cohérence, d'ailleurs, on la retrouve dans le travail artistique de Gilles Jobin, qui explore depuis plus de 15 ans les interactions entre l'espace, le mouvement, le corps et l'esprit. Sa volonté de faire se rencontrer la chorégraphie et la physique, sa curiosité pour des œuvres musicales qui induisent des mouvements complexes, comme la pièce qu'il a créée l'an dernier sur la musique de John Adams, Shaker Loops, qui a été jouée en direct le 2 octobre dernier au BFM. Je ne sais pas si certains dans l'Assemblée ont eu la chance de la découvrir. J'en profite d'ailleurs peut-être pour dire qu'elle sera jouée, si je ne me trompe pas, au théâtre Benoît Besson, le 10 janvier 2013 à Yverdon, donc on peut encore rattraper. Il y a donc bien un fil rouge entre l'antimatière et le corps humain, entre la performance du danseur, éphémère par essence, et les collisions de particules. Gilles Jobin nous le confirmera tout à l'heure, lui qui a eu l'occasion de dérouler son fil rouge au CERN avec les physiciens qui l'ont inspiré. Un grand merci au CERN pour cette initiative, auquel vraiment le canton se réjouit de participer. A great evening to all of you. Thanks for your attention.
Okay. Okay, hello everybody. I'm very nervous. I'm very happy to be here, finally, after all this time. I thought about this evening many times, and it's very different than the way I expected it to be, of course. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Madame, Monsieur les représentants de l'État de Genève, les représentants de la ville de Genève, Monsieur le Directeur Général. I'm very happy to welcome you at the final lecture of my residence, Collide at CERN Geneva. Why is it not running? Yes? No? Yes? No? No? Okay, it's okay. I continue. I'm very happy to welcome you at the final lecture of my residency, Collide at CERN Geneva. It has been a truly inspiring time for me to be here. I had the unique opportunity to live and work in the middle of the largest particle physics laboratory in the world, and I would like to thank everybody here at CERN for making me feel so welcome. I want to thank especially Ariane for being a fantastic facilitator and mediator between art and science. With great sensibility, she introduced me to many scientists that have taken some of their precious time to meet with me. Thanks to all of you, it has been fantastic. I also want to especially thank everybody at CERN that helped us organize the different live interventions we did on the site. Always a challenge to play out of the box. For this lecture, I will concentrate on the main lines of my investigation. I will try to show where I stand artistically after the months I have spent in CERN. What I can say is that it is only the beginning, as I've only had a flavor of what could be possible to develop in relation to dance and physics. I have discovered a tiny percentage of this fabulous universe of CERN, and I didn't visit all of the labs. It's impossible, there's too many. But what I have seen, maybe I should say felt, even in the tiniest experiment, always had so many layers and connections between mind, knowledge, abstraction, and passion. During my time here, I tried to melt into the space, to become one of the natural branch of investigation of this gigantic lab. I found so interesting in physics the a priori counterintuitive approach in which theory comes before observation. This very interesting zone of tension between knowledge and counterintuition. What I brought in with me as a choreographer was my embodied knowledge, my ability to trigger thoughts and emotion inside the viewer's brain by organizing the movement of bodies in space and time by matter of intuition. It might seem a bit abstract, but it does work, and contemporary dance does just this. It is a trigger to think laterally. Contemporary dance is based on the juxtaposition of different non-narrative performative strategies. What you see is what you think. You are free to think whatever you want, but there is a structure to guide you, embedded in the piece you are watching. To me, as a spectator, contemporary dance is about watching choreographic structure unfolding and thinking for myself. What I have learned at CERN is that fundamental research is fundamental in science, but also in the arts. In Europe, dance is a production-based activity. We don't search enough and produce too much. But just like in science, we need dedicated labs in contemporary dance. Science shows us the importance of research to feed knowledge. Actually, we should not call it search or research, but fundamental knowledge building. Building fundamental knowledge without the necessity to make a product at the end. But the most important lesson I have learned in CERN is that knowledge is there only to be shared. So, I'm a choreographer. I'm a theorist and an experimentalist. I'm a theorist because I build up artistic concept, choreographic concept, maybe even dramaturgy. And there's all the thinking and inspiration that is needed to build up a project. I'm an experimentalist because in the dance studio, in my lab, I invent movement out of the void. New ways, new choreographic structures and movement generators. I work with an empty space. I'm faced with the human body as a tool for action. And the body is very significant. I work on a timeline, which means that we share the same space-time dimension, audience and dancer together. Somehow we grow old together. We are synchronized in time. So I work mainly with space, time, and movement. I can relate with particle physics. It is not as self-evident as I intuitively first thought. But yes, it seems to be possible to create sequences of movement with a certain level of coherence with particle physics principle. And of course, the support of physicists. For this research project, I have been interested in space, both physical and experimental. And what I mean by a physical space is the geography of the CERN campus, the potential of this gigantic laboratory and all those spaces that are around, and also this network, all those networks and connection and its functional architecture. And the experimental is more the virtual space, the theoretical space, and the space of particle physics, space at the smallest level. I've been interested also in fundamental forces. And the fundamental forces are all non-contact forces. And this has been quite interesting to me as I've been working in my studio, as you will see later. And then also symmetries, which I see them as a tool for composition. So exploring spaces. So the first space I explored in CERN was my office. This is my office. On the first day I arrived. And this is the place where I read and thought and planned my interventions. It also was my base. It was the tool for me to live a normal life at CERN. And I think this is really essential to really be working inside the space. From this office with Arts at CERN, we organized site-specific performances, on-site lecture on the history of contemporary dance. We transformed the restaurant into a performance space and many other things that we did. And also, we had many inspirational meetings with eminent scientists, guests in that office. Many of the concepts I was about to discover during my residency would have a deep and lasting impact on the way I was considering the movement of a body in space. I also realized that in art, just like in physics, one could also apply the notion that a principle, a structure, must be coherent for itself, independently from the position of the observer. It is interesting because in contemporary dance, the configuration of a theater offers precisely a fixed position for the observer. So I started to wonder about CERN, grabbing some images, perspectives, strange machine. This machine is quite interesting because it's the switch is an analogic switch that to turn off the LHC actually. Quite impressive. So many images, so many so many things to discover. This is not the LHC. This is the water supply of CERN. Actually, there's a whole network of supply and services, like this one too. This is a magnet in the magnet exhibition hall, and magnets and magnetic field in general will become important in my research. And then, in the middle of all this, I had my IP days. The IP days are the inspirational partner days. And this is my friend Joao. And so when I didn't know what to do, when I was lost in translation, I would go to meet my inspirational partner, Joao Pequeñao. On the day of that photo, we had a very interesting and stimulating discussion about magnetic fields that got me started on some practical experiment. We are now talking and thinking about ideas involving motion capture with the Kinect and the Higgs field. Maybe a connection with the project I have of a 3D movie in 2014. We will see, so there will be more to that. So, experiment. So I needed to start to do some experiment. So I brought in an engineer, and I started from basics, working on magnetic fields. And that gave me a lot of ideas around non-contact forces. This is my son, Matteo. Then I did some drawings. I used those little applets that I found on internet, which are actually a game, is a puck game, is to play around magnets. So you have all those blue magnets that are negatively charged and the red one are positively charged, and you can make some. I misused it to make some drawings, and if you want, if it works, I can show you how it goes. So this is a little applet. Okay, here we go. So all the blue dots, the blue lines are the fields, and you see it moves by itself, and I can change with my mouse. I can change the mass, make it go faster, slower. I can show you the fields. And that gave me some ideas to develop later in terms of movement. Like mapping the body with like implementing some different fields inside the body, for instance. Then we went down to the dance studio with Susanna, one of the company dancer, and we work in the CERN Dancing Club. And I would like to thank the CERN Dancing Club for letting us using that space. So we worked on magnetic forces, magnetic fields. Were not always resulting, but then nevertheless we did some very interesting mistakes, and a few discoveries. Then the 4th of July. What happened? The Higgs-like particle. There was so much excitement around the CERN. I knew I did it, but I couldn't say it. International press everywhere, scientists, students everywhere. There was a sense of something really big going on. So I grabbed my photo camera. I was there at 8 o'clock in the morning, took a lot of photos, and it was really, really impressive. And there he is, Higgs, Mr. Higgs himself. And I was really surprised because I knew, as you said, Rolf, I knew it was going to happen. I mean, it was there, but I was caught by surprise. I didn't realize how emotional it was going to be, and it made me start traveling back in time. And I realized that I was born in 1964, and that's the year Brod and Englert and Higgs published a paper predicting the famous boson. So it took them my lifetime to see their prediction verified. So I hope you give me another 40 years, Rolf, and I will present you a proper piece of dancing. So yeah, in physics, time is relative, but in this case, I was realizing that whatever we do, we are synchronized to the same human clock. And on that day, physics felt like family. Then we moved on. A few weeks later, we wanted to do a presentation of one of my pieces inside CERN. And I've been doing a few experiments. But of course, when you show experiments, they are experiments. It's not a finished piece of work. And I wanted to show a proper finished piece of work and make it accessible to people in CERN. So we looked for different spaces, and we found that the CERN Restaurant 1 was the best suited places for that. That I call it food for thought, because that's really a very important place in CERN. There's so many people coming every day to eat and talk and speak and meet, and there's a lot of exchange. Is like the CERN biological space. So it was interesting to be seen from inside and from outside, dancing without disturbing the normal life of the light, being visible only to the ones who were looking. And I think it's something that also you see here. I mean, you don't see nothing, but there's so many things going on. And I think that's what I try to do in the different intervention. As you mentioned, Rolf, in the library, we try really to melt into the rhythm and the time that people were living. It's like a little, when you get into water, if you go very slowly into water, you won't disturb the element. And if you jump into water, then everybody's going to be surprised. So that was a little bit the idea, to really be embedded in this experiment, just as another scientist. So we did this presentation. This is the CERN cafeteria that we just transformed for the afternoon in a beautiful dance space. And the music you are going to hear is the music composed by Carla Scaletti and Christian Vogel for Spider Galaxies. And they did use some of simulated data from LHC to create this music. Okay, so after all this, it was time to get into proper experiment and start to work into my lab, which is the dance studio. So it was time to bring physicists into my lab, the dance studio. So in October, we organized 3 working sessions in my dance studio in Geneva with the CERN physicist Michael Dozer and Nicolas Chanon, which is somewhere around here. We talk about fields, waves, quarks, and the strong force, direction, preferences, particle behaviors, non-contact forces, Feynman's diagrams, symmetries, etc. Building up a common language between particle physics and contemporary dance is time-consuming and needs a lot of fine-tuning. So I came up with the 4 fundamental forces, which are all non-contact forces, and I'm not going to go through those forces here, because you all know what it is. I mean, at least half of you. But in choreographical terms, the electromagnetic force, for instance, I consider it as it has this on-off possibility, negative, positive. You can turn it off, you can turn it off. So there's all this possibility of starting, stopping, and coming in. There's also the fields. The fields can have an influence on a system. So you could imagine that you create some fields, may they be virtual or real, that would influence, let's say, a dancer getting into a zone of a certain field. And also it indicates direction. So you can, with the electromagnetic force, you can find directions into your movement. So they would, from outside, create some directions. I hope I'm okay. The strong force. This is very counterintuitive, and actually is the most difficult one, I think, to work with. But it has, I think, a lot of potential. I've been having some new ideas actually. And it's responsible for keeping the quarks together. So it's counterintuitive in the sense that the closer, when they are very close, they are very loose. They have a lot of movement, and when they pull from each other, they become really, 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 really tense. And eventually, if they pop out, they would recompose out of the void. So it's quite difficult to find a way to use this. It's very counterintuitive, but I think I have a few ideas, and maybe Joao was going to be able to help me on that. The weak force is responsible for the decay of the nuclear decay, no? So it's a decay in time. So for radioactivity decay, so is on a timeline. So let's imagine that you have 100,000-year decay. Then you have all these events that are coming in at some certain moment. So you could reduce this into 1 hour and use those entries as triggers for events. They can be music, can be light, can be also things that come from other places. We haven't looked very much into that yet. And gravitation, of course, is the most known force for us as for a dancer, because we used it all the time. All the energy and the movement. We use all this kind of sense of moving and falling again, no? But what I realize is that because we are matter holding together, I don't feel grounded anymore like I used to. And this is counterintuitive, because my education in contemporary dance is very much has to do with the gravity and being grounded and being to the floor. So suddenly I realize that I'm like just gently floating on the earth, and this force is not so powerful, because I can lift my arm against the power of the whole planet. So it's not that powerful. And I thought it was very powerful, but it's not that powerful. So this is something that I think is going to take time for me to change the way I move, but is a new idea. And you can, dance is about, having ideas and make them go through your body. Okay, so now let's go for a live experiment. So I would like to show some live experiment, because as you will see, they are pretty self-speaking example. Everything I'm saying seems to be quite abstract, but you can see that you can find really quick applications. So what you're about to see is not a finished work. It is a sketch of a dance to be. Say that it has only like 1 sigma significance, maybe not even. I I also want to say that it's not about demonstrating a physical principle. So we will be explaining a little bit, but that's not the idea. It's not a demonstration. It's not about that. It's really about create abstract movements, and then we can use it in many different situations. And then what you see here is only the conclusion of only 3 sessions of work, not 40 years of research, and that we did with Michael and Nicolas, and 3 or more sessions with the dancers. So it's really a tiny start. And I think that the principles are not fully coherent yet, but we know, and that's what I think we agreed on, that to discover that is possible, and we think there is a possibility to create a coherent situation coherent with physics. Okay, so let's do it. Okay, so let me introduce the dancer from the company. This is Ruth and Isabelle and Martin and Susanna. So after you've seen at the slide before, you would consider me as a magnet, and then we will show something also which is about the non-contact force, yeah? So just consider me as a magnet. Okay, so now the last me. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so now I'm going to demonstrate some of the things that we did with the magnets. And then I change. There's this question of being connected without any contact, yeah? With force and a field. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now let's do Okay, so now they're going to start to work a little bit on this principle. So now it's getting a little bit bigger. There's like more directions coming out. More movement. And then you see start to see direction coming. Some preferences in the directions. A little bit faster and longer. Okay, thank you. Okay, I forgot to mention before, the little section that we showed first is a choreograph section. So we consider it as organized matter. Let's say that is inside an organized matter, so that's where they're all facing in the same direction, look at my field. So I represent this with a fixed choreography. In this case, it's not fixed, they kind of improvise, they have to find their way through the system. So now we have another example. There are three, could be particles, let's say. And then they're going to get closer and they hook and they connect through those fields. Okay, now there are three, so that changes the structure of the movement. The movement slowly changes because there are three, and then at some point there is a transformation inside. And that creates some agitation around Martin, which is changing his quality. He changed behavior. And the dancers around are more agitated. And at some point, they're going to just pop out and recover their own freedom. Okay, thank you. Okay, now, we also work on symmetry. If you can bring me the slide for symmetry, please. Thank you. Okay, so in this one, it's a very simple thing, but it's quite interesting. So we decided that in this space, there's let's imagine there's two virtual mirrors, one going this way and one going this way. So Isabelle and Susanna are facing this mirror, and these two are facing this mirror, okay? So they have to work always in symmetry. And they are improvising, so it's not a fixed choreography, but we could, of course, later on organize it. Okay, so go on. Let me put a little bit of sound. So what I find interesting in this is that working you have only 4 dancers, so but already you can create with symmetry asymmetries, and you can imagine this with 12 dancers or 8 dancers or more dancers. Then you can create a lot of complex situation. And of course, you can also start to change this facing, and also we discovered that there's many symmetries, and you can also have all sorts of different symmetries. I mean, symmetries is a huge thing. So now we're going to do the last little thing we're going to do. So we keep the idea of the mirror in this way and the mirror in that way, but they're going to be spread out in the middle. So that half of Susanna is going to be connected with Ruth, and that half of Ruth with Susanna, and that half of Ruth with Isabelle, and that half of Isabelle with Martin, and that half of Martin with Susanna. As you can see, they have to double check. They have to check the right side, the left side. course, again, we could make this much more complex if we choreograph all the movement. But also, it's kind of nice to have this kind of little delay in the reaction, and that can also create a different kind of relation. So now I think they're going to do the same, but a little bit quicker. So it's going to be more difficult with the change of quarter. Back. Okay, nice. One more time. And now you do it again, but then when you get to the middle, you change side. Okay. So they need to reorganize now, back and again. And again, back to the center and change again. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, the music that you heard was composed by Carla Scarletti. I received it about 2 days ago, and actually it's music composed with real data from the LHC. So before they used simulated data, now they got hold of some real data. So it's a little bit of an exclusivity to have this tonight. And when we were talking about creative collision, I think this encounter with Carla Scarletti is one, and actually I met her and then we went to CERN, and that's how I met CERN, so this is really very connected. And the unexpected creative collision. Maybe you came to the final lecture of Julius von Bismarck, which was the artist before me. And I was there, just as you are tonight. And I look at his new piece, the piece that he did, this piece with light, which is about gravity. And it's a very beautiful piece. And then I saw him after, and I said, look, that would be a really nice piece to make a light for dance. And he said, yeah, that's how I always thought about that. That would be a nice light for dance. I said, okay, well, that's it, let's do it. So that's it, it's happening. So we don't know exactly where, hopefully not too far from here, and hopefully not too long ago. Hopefully next year we'll get to make a full piece developing those principles and putting together the music of Carla and the light and the piece of Julius. So I'm getting to the end of this presentation. So I would like to finish my presentation here with this beautiful Feynman's diagram. Most of you know that Feynman was a Nobel Prize, an American physicist, very interesting scientist and personality, pretty good bongo player, and many other things. He has other nice hobbies. So this very simple visualization of what would otherwise be a rather abstract formulas of subatomic particles interactions open a door for investigation between dance and physics. We think we didn't have time to experiment it because it's really something that came out at the end of our 3 sessions with Michael and Nicola. But we think that there might be a possibility to write dance with diagrams. So I will need to learn, and I can use any help. So thank you very much. We will continue with the discussion. And thank you.
So we're going to have a discussion now, which is about the interventions. So you can have a little insight into the interventions which Gilles did here at CERN. And after that, there'll be opportunity to ask questions, and then obviously then to mingle and mix and have some refreshments at the end. So just doing the chairs now. I think really it's fair to say that a feature of Gilles' residency here was the interventions. He was popping up in unexpected places, not only my office. He was popping up all over the place and really made a mark in interrogating the spaces of CERN and making CERN scientists look at things in a very, very different way. So I'd like to welcome to the stage two of the collaborators during the interventions, both CERN scientists, Maria Dimo, who works at the Computer Center at CERN, where we did one intervention, and Michael Dozer, who works in the antimatter factory, as it's popularly known, and is a CERN scientist and member of the CERN Cultural Board. So we're just going to take you through a few of the interventions so you can have a sense of what we got up to, the kind of box of tricks which Gilles got up to. So I think we should begin with the library, which obviously made a mark on Rolf. And it would be great to have some of the slides from the library. And I would say that the library intervention, in a way, was very much a meditation. And you need to watch the pictures. There's some pictures at the end which will give you a clue. It really was a meditation about focus, the focus of physicists meeting the focus of artists. And both have such intense focus. But you just spot and watch a picture at the end which gives the whole game away, I would say. But what really inspired you? I mean, it was called Strangels. I wonder if you can explain why you had this idea of strangels entering the sanctity of the CERN library. And here are some of them entering.
Well, actually, when I was looking, from my studio, I could see on the other side of the yard this library, and I started exploring it. And then when I talked to you about it, you told me that you were thinking about doing some events and some performances in the library. So I thought, well, that's great. So I thought, well, okay, that's a good idea. But then, what do you do in a library? Because you don't want to disturb people working. You don't want to stop what they do. You want to. When we discussed, we wanted to make two interventions. One intervention was without people knowing that we were going to be there, and then the second one, some people knew, so they could come and see. So there was audience. But on the first one, it was really a surprise. And for me, the idea was a little bit, maybe you saw this movie from Wim Wenders, the Wings of Desire. And there is this moment where there's those angels, they rest in libraries because they can hear people thinking, and they like very much to be near people thinking nice, interesting stuff. Actually, they can hear them read. So I thought, that's a nice kind of other dimension, kind of possibility to be there. And I needed some kind of justification. And with this simple justification, it was strange and angels and strangels, and I thought, that would be a nice name for a new particle. And there was this idea of like when you like getting into water really slowly, and then you don't really disturb the element, and you become part of the element and the time of the element. And as you said, it worked. I mean, I was also myself surprised on the way people didn't really react. I mean, they react, they looked, but it was so natural. So I don't know, it was strange.
And it's fair to say Maria was one of the people who came to the announced performance of the Strangels, because as Gilles said, there was one which was unannounced, happened, nobody knew it was happening. But Maria came to the one which she knew was happening. And I wondered what your response was as a scientist when you saw this movement happening in the library where people were very still, but there was this very slow movement with people hanging off shelves and suddenly jumping out of shelves holding books. What was your response?
Well, first of all, I didn't know what to expect. It is true that Strangers, it did make me think of the Wim Wenders movie without having discussed with Gilles, that is true. So I was intuitively expecting something very silent, not making noise. But there were some clues that were very significant emotionally for me. But of course, I understand that the perception of reality matters more than reality itself, and perception is different for everybody. There was a friend of mine working in the library at that time when I entered that did not feel at all the way I felt. So, but for example, I found that their slow motion and the choice of books and piling up the books, it was like the titles, you have seen some of the titles in these photos, they were really so well selected. And the fact that you could only hear Gregory's clicking for taking the pictures was like something going on vertical in a total horizontal silence all over the place. And then there was one moment that I really was in tears because it really spoke to me visually. There was a guy reading at a table that was in front of the window, and he was facing out. And the window... That's him.
It's behind you.
Yeah, so this guy... You see, that's why I say perception of reality is probably more important and more difficult to excuse, actually. I had the impression, I haven't seen his face ever. I think this is a very shy guy. And when Gilles and Ruth started literally crawling on the shelf in front of the window, that window has a fantastic view, and he was very concentrated on his page. I think he has his laptop next, but I'm not sure. The thing is that Gilles discreetly left a little paper next to his book. So it was very interesting to see that he turned, he looked at them, and as if he were embarrassed, he looked on his page again. And then he could see they are approaching, so from the back, you couldn't see his face. It was all just as if the cells of his back were telling me this, that he was starting to worry. Where are they going to go? They were getting very close. And in the end, he opted that it's safest for him that he keeps on reading his book. It was, I don't know, for me, it was a very touching moment. It was not real dance the way my teachers teach me. It was not a lot of stuff, but it was kind of a communion moment. I really felt it like this.
And one of the other places we went was the antimatter factory, as it's popularly known. And Michael was one of the CERN scientists inside there. Why did you feel you wanted to invite chaos into the experiment hall? What was the impulse behind that decision to say, yes, Gilles, come and intervene?
Well, when you usually see dance, it's a question of perspective. When you usually see dance, as you said before, there's the point of view of the observer. You're sort of sitting in front, and the action is in front of you on the scene, on the stage. The AD doesn't allow that. It has a geography that is completely different. You cannot have the dancers and the spectators on the same level. So one of the reasons why I wanted to see what would happen in the AD is to force the viewers to look down on the dancers, to have a totally different view of how dance is. You don't see it from the front, you see it from the top. So you get a totally different perspective on dance inside a space like this. That was the one thing. The other thing I wanted to see was, again, a question of perspective, and this time it's a perspective of the dancers, of the choreographer, to see how their perspective of what we're working on would influence them. And basically the AD is looking at atomic physics, it's looking at spectroscopy, it's looking at gravity. And so I was curious about those aspects, and symmetry, of course, symmetry between matter and antimatter, how those aspects would be realized, how they would be concretely represented by the dancers. And in fact, I saw three areas from the dancers. I have no idea whether this is what they wanted or not. But I saw gravity. Our impression of gravity as being a force that goes from top to bottom, vertical. The dancers had one piece where they started crawling on top of each other horizontally. And as they progressed, they went more and more into the vertical. And so it's as if the gravitational field there wasn't vertical, but started out horizontal and went into a vertical field, which is totally counterintuitive. It's not what we're used to, but it's a field that I now see in this space. I also saw wave packets moving, where the first dancer stopped and the last dancer hurried up to catch up with this first dancer. So as the dancers moved through this space, they moved like wave packets, bouncing through the different potential wells inside the AD. And the third thing I saw, again to atomic physics, is what you just saw before. Two dancers dancing around each other but not touching each other, probing each other's electromagnetic force as they go around each other, a non-contact interaction. And then finally, and I don't know if the drawing, the paintings, the traces that they left will still be visible.
I think I misplaced them, but I will find them.
Because there's something very important about choreography. It's only at the moment that you see the choreography that you see something, that you experience something. There's no trace left. And so I was curious about whether there would be any trace left inside the AD of their passage. And in fact, there is now. And this is one of the very, very few traces of the passage of an artist at CERN. And these are the outlines of the dancers. As they were inside the AD, they sketched their own bodies. And these drawings, these outlines, these memories are now stuck inside the AD forever.
You're not worried about them being a distraction?
They're in a well-hidden place, so I don't think you'll find them very easily.
And Gilles, what is your response to being invited into the antimatter hall? What were you trying to do? You obviously weren't trying to illustrate the science, you were responding to it. But what was your impulse?
Well, just the notion of antimatter is just really interesting. It's really beyond the invisible. Is something that is just almost impossible to see. No, I mean you only see traces of it. So, but also I was very much impressed by the size of the site, this industrial site, and all the perspective that you could get out of that. But what I want to say, all those three interventions, they are really quick. It's like grabbing the space very quickly. It's not something that you have really time to develop and to think. But I realized that if I would stay in my little office all the residency, I would never get to grab, more problems and situations. So I'm very physical, I'm not a physicist, but I'm physical. So I need to move, I need to get in contact with space. So what Michael is saying is the things that are kind of coming afterward, and is I needed to get into the situation to get some reaction, and then I learned from doing it. And again, you need to experiment. There's one moment you have to get into the situation, and that's when you find.
And the other space you went into was the hallowed space of the CERN Computer Center. Maria, how and why did you let loose Gilles and the dancers inside the computer space, the hallowed space, the big computer farm?
Well, first of all, it's not me who left them loose because I asked for formal permission. I was totally thrilled that the department head was positive, so I was very, very happy about this. But I was trying to suggest this idea to Gilles since he arrived here, because the CERN Computer Center, in a way, it is less in the news than the detectors or the accelerator, but the computer center is very important because we understand what are these ones and zeros of the data we try to store or send to other important places that are collaborating institutes. And also because the CERN Computer Center, since the beginning of the LHC, it's impossible to visit except with very special permissions, very few people at the time, etc. So via this event, it was possible to get some people to see from the visiting gallery, to see the pictures, to see on Gilles' site and on your site. And also because it's a place which looks very austere. It is square, it is...
noisy.
Yeah.
Hot.
In the past, when we had the cray and the mainframes, it was much more interesting. It would be the best scenery for the Grand Théâtre de Genève. But now we have very identical boxes, but they have these lights that they are clicking a lot, and they give this asymmetric kind of movement. And they did this that you just saw, like curving around each other without touching each other. And it was very beautiful to see the difference between everything that is immobile and square and always fixed in one place, and themselves dancing around each other. And there was also a very big solidarity because of the fact that we could have very small groups to watch at the time. There was a group of people that were coming and going like waves. It was a very beautiful experience for us, I think.
So it's really about new ways of looking, isn't it? And is that also what drove you, this kind of new ways of looking?
Yes, I think chronologically we did first the library, then the Calcul Center, and then the antimatter experiment. Yes, because the library, of course, there's this situation, this question of time, people are spending time in the library, so it's very relative. The way you feel time in the library can, be never ending, or it can go really quickly. So we try to melt into this idea of time. So the position of the observer was more of a durational performance, so it lasted for 2 hours. So you could be in the library and we would be on the other side, you wouldn't notice us and see us again and then not again. So it was very gentle, but it was this question of the observer was busy doing something else, and we were there, we're just in the same space. And the Calcul Center, I think there was all this question of the flow of data, which is really, interesting especially when you know a little bit what it involves. It's just like a huge amount, there's crazy quantities of data. But also there's a very special quality to this space because of the noise of the machine. So you become somehow silenced because you don't hear yourself and people don't hear you. And also the only way to see this was from the balcony, that they have this balcony which has some kind of glass windows. So you hear the sound but it's muffled. So what we were doing was really there's a lot of distance in the way they were looking at what we were doing. So I think, obviously I didn't see it, but I think it was... I'm sure it was interesting. That's the situation that was a bit strange to live for the spectators. And the antimatter hall, I think it was should be inside the usedness of the space, and and doing things really far away at a distance, and then, as you say, crawling on the stairs, and then they become on the same level than you. So there was all this question of the position of the observer. I didn't get so much into the question of the antimatter because it's too complicated. Then the next step was to go into my lab, because that's when I started to, when we talked with Michael and with Nicolas, and we realized, how we can find a language, but it takes time. It's not that self-evident. It's not so easy. So they need to understand what we do. They need to see what we do, how we move, how we organize movement. So there's a bit of culture also they need to get before they can be efficient. Like I needed to get a bit of catch up on my physics to be able to dialogue.
So you can see that interventions work both ways, physicists into the artistic space and artists into the science space, and that's one of the features of Collide at CERN, that it happens in that way. So at this point we're very happy to take questions from anybody from the audience. You can ask us about anything, and João Pequenão, who's the inspiration partner of Gilles, is in the audience somewhere as well. So if anybody's got any questions, do put your hand up and then a mic will come towards you. It's left everyone dumbfounded, I think.
The photos that you have seen are from Grégory Battardon. He's here. I would like to mention because they are really beautiful. I hope we get an opportunity to show them somewhere at some point. I'm sure we will.
Well, what I would say is it would be great to just come up to any of us individually, having had refreshments, and come and talk to us. And you will see that many people participated in the interventions at CERN, so the CERN community were very, very much involved, so we'd like to thank all those. But also all the scientists and all the supporters we've had for the programme so far. And I'd also like to thank all the volunteers who are helping here tonight, who are spending their own time to meet and greet you and facilitate you as well. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and look forward to you coming to the next Collide at CERN Geneva, which will be for film. So see you then.
Thank you.